You need to leave your aunt today. The voice was cold, deliberate. No explanation, no hesitation. Just those words, and the weight behind them crushed the air in the room. I blinked, trying to process what I just heard. A social worker, someone I thought neutral, someone I thought safe, slid a thin envelope across the table toward me. My hands trembled. I couldn't move. The words repeated themselves in my head like a mantra I didn't understand. You need to leave your aunt today. What I saw next changed everything. My name is Elena Moros. I was 18, just out of high school, lost, and alone after my parents' death in a car accident on Route 9. One moment, they existed. The next, they were gone. I spent weeks bouncing between friends' couches, sleeping on floors, stuffing myself with whatever I could scavenge from convenience stores, my backpack stuffed with half-finished notebooks and old photographs of a life that no longer felt real. College brochures lined my bedroom floor, unopened, unread, mocking me silently. It was in that haze of fear and uncertainty that I received the call from my aunt, Marta Korolenko, my mother's older sister. She sounded warm, safe, reliable. A woman with perfect posture, sharp eyes, and a voice that could slice glass without raising its volume. She lived in Brighton Heights, in a neat brick house with climbing ivy along the porch, and ran a small cleaning business in town. Come live with me, she said. You'll be safe. Your family. I believed her. When I arrived, she hugged me briefly, too tight, her grip lingering in a way that made my ribs ache. She guided me through the house, showing me the rooms, the staircase, the laundry area in the basement. Everything smelled of bleach and lemon polish. This is your home now, she said, her tone gentle but firm, like a teacher correcting a child. She handed me a set of keys to a tiny bedroom at the back of the house. The window overlooked the alley behind the garage. It was small, cold in winter, hot in summer, but it was mine, sort of. The first day was simple. Breakfast. Chores. Sweeping the floors. Dusting the shelves. Cleaning windows until my arms ached. Marta hovered in the background, observing, correcting, criticizing. Every task had to be perfect. Don't waste time, she would say. Learn discipline. By the second week, the work multiplied. I cleaned offices downtown before dawn, then spent afternoons scrubbing clients' homes, hands raw and bleeding. Nights were spent folding laundry, organizing supplies, or mopping the floors of Marta's business space. No pay. No mention of college, no promise of learning, no gratitude. Later, she said each time I asked about classes. Later, Elena. Don't be ungrateful. I quickly learned to move quietly. To vanish into shadows. To clean without acknowledgement, to eat only what was left after everyone else, to sleep lightly on a mattress that sank unevenly in the middle. Her house was full of subtle surveillance, the way she always knew when I had eaten or not, the precise time she would call me upstairs to scrub a bathroom she had already walked past. I became a ghost. Silent. Invisible. Trained. Years blurred. 2 full cycles of seasons, 2 birthdays unnoticed, 2 holidays spent alone or in service. I didn't complain. I didn't ask for more. I adapted. Survival became a habit. I memorized her schedule. I anticipated her moods. I learned to dodge criticism with a nod, a smile, a timely, yes, Aunt Marta. And then one morning, I woke with a strange clarity. I was no longer just enduring. I was observing. Every instruction, every correction, every insult mapped in my mind. I realized something terrifying. She had trained me, shaped me, used me for her gain. Not love. Not kindness. Only labor. Only obedience. And I had let it happen. I spent weeks planning. Not a confrontation. Not an argument. A departure. One quiet morning, I packed my belongings into the backpack I had kept hidden under my bed. Documents. Some cash I had saved from small tips over months. A few personal items. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I walked out the front door, letting it close softly behind me, and disappeared into the dawn. The streets smelled of damp asphalt and promise. Freedom. It felt alien, almost dangerous, after years of subservience. My heart pounded with fear and exhilaration. I didn't look back. I had learned the hard way that attachment can be a trap. That the people who call themselves family are not always protectors. That survival sometimes demands invisibility. I rebuilt myself. Slowly. One small victory at a time. Night classes. Part-time jobs. Therapy. Friends who didn't demand labor in exchange for affection. Each step strengthened me. By my late 20s, I had a steady job as a communications analyst in Cleveland. I lived in a modest townhouse with a white-trimmed porch, bought with my own money. My apartment smelled of clean linen and coffee, not bleach and fear. I had friends I trusted, a life I had earned, a sense of stability that was fragile but mine. Then, 10 years after I had left, it happened. One rainy afternoon, there was a knock at my door. I froze. My heart seized. I had learned to recognize that exact hesitation in a person, the kind that betrays confusion, fear, and something unspoken. I opened the door slowly, and there she was. Marta. Older, thinner, trembling, her eyes darting. The confidence she once wielded like a weapon was gone. For the first time, she looked small. Vulnerable. Defenseless. And in that instant, I realized just how far I had come. I could see the calculations behind her gaze, the flicker of fear. She didn't understand that I had survived. That I had learned. That I was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived on her doorstep 10 years ago. I stepped aside. Let her in. Let the silence speak louder than words. Because now the balance had shifted, the days after I left were quieter than I expected. The streets of Cleveland welcomed me with anonymity I had never known. I rented a tiny studio above a laundromat on Maplewood Avenue, paid in cash, leased under a friend's name. It smelled of detergent and warm metal. I could finally breathe. My hands shook every time I touched the keys. I had survived. That alone felt revolutionary. But the past doesn't leave quietly. At first, it was subtle. I found myself scrubbing dishes too long, arranging books just so, checking every corner of the apartment for cleanliness. Old habits from Marta's regime had stuck. My body remembered the floors of her business, the raw smell of bleach, the endless repetition of tasks. I forced myself to stop, to breathe. To live. I started working at Hawthorne Communications, a mid-sized marketing firm downtown. The pay was enough to cover rent, groceries, a subway pass, and some small luxuries. I reveled in the mundanity. Making my own decisions, buying my own coffee, choosing my own schedule, it was dizzying at first. I even allowed myself a weekend trip to Cuyahoga Valley, walking along the trails, the wind tugging at my hair, the sun warm on my face. I laughed for the first time in years without guilt. Still, Marta lingered in my mind. Her words, her voice, the way she had cornered me into compliance. I remembered her saying, "Discipline is survival. You will thank me one day." I had never thanked her. I had wanted only escape. And yet, I realized, she had given me something valuable. Not love. Not guidance. But endurance. Observation. Stealth. Patience. All the tools I needed to rebuild myself. I saved money. Slowly, meticulously. I opened a small account in my own name, never linking it to my past. I kept every receipt, every paycheck stub. Every transaction became a statement: I exist. I matter. I am mine. Then, subtle threats began appearing. A package at the laundromat with no return address, a cleaning brush I had used years ago, wrapped in brown paper. A message scribbled on a sticky note inside: "Don't forget where you came from." My stomach twisted. I didn't respond. I shredded the note. I ignored the package. Phone calls came from blocked numbers. Heavy breathing. Static. Then silence. I didn't call back. I didn't panic. Instead, I documented everything. I started recording, filing, cataloging. Every encounter, every sign, every memory I could tie to Marta or her world of control. I enrolled in night classes at Cleveland Community College, learning accounting and communications law. I studied until my eyes blurred. I wanted knowledge, power, independence, things she had never given me. The more I learned, the more I felt untouchable. I could never unsee what she had done to me. But now, I could plan, anticipate, and protect myself. Friends came slowly. I was guarded at first. Trust had to be earned, not given. Lena, my classmate in accounting, became the first person I told everything to. Her eyes widened, but she never judged. She listened, helped me strategize. Together, we reviewed what I knew about Marta's business, her clients, her finances. It was 2 years into my independence that I realized something critical. Marta hadn't stopped controlling me when I left. She had kept tabs, consciously or unconsciously. Each threatening note, each memory-triggering object, was her attempt to remind me, I am still the one with power. The turning point came with a phone call. "Are you awake?" a voice whispered. Recognizable, soft, cruel. I froze. My apartment suddenly felt tiny. Vulnerable. "You can't hide from me, Elena." Click. Silence. I did not panic. Not anymore. I had spent years building walls, skills, and networks. I immediately called Lena, gave her the number, and documented the call. Then I blocked it. Then I started digging into Marta's new operations. New businesses, new employees, clients who didn't question her authority. Patterns emerged: unpaid labor, subtle coercion, silent compliance. People who had once been like me, trapped and invisible. I spent months compiling the evidence. Screenshots. Receipts. Contracts. Photos of her offices. Testimonies from previous employees who had left quietly. I learned names, dates, payment records. I traced every transaction back to accounts she controlled. Even small cash tips given to employees were funneled through her business in ways that were suspicious. Each night, I reviewed it all. Alone in my apartment, under the hum of the ceiling fan, I realized the truth: I was not just a survivor. I was becoming an instrument of justice. I had all the tools she had given me, and I would use them against her. I started contacting former victims. Carefully. Anonymously at first, to gauge trust. They responded. Some were shocked. Some relieved. Many had tried to speak out before and failed. They were eager to talk. To finally be heard. To finally see Marta's control crumble. One night, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea, I smiled quietly. For the first time, I felt strategy replace fear. My past did not define me. Her attempts to haunt me no longer held power. I was no longer the girl who had scrubbed floors until her hands bled. I was the woman who had survived, adapted, and learned. That's when I realized, Marta had underestimated me. She had always assumed obedience was permanent. She had assumed fear was eternal. She had assumed she could control everything, forever. But she hadn't accounted for time, patience, and meticulous planning. She hadn't accounted for me. I started setting a timeline. Contacts. Documents. Evidence packets. Every email, every testimonial, every photograph filed and verified. I created a network of allies I could trust. Lawyers, investigators, friends from college, former employees. Everyone had a piece of the puzzle. I didn't rush. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I watched. I learned. I waited. Then one morning, the final puzzle piece fell into place. A former assistant of Marta's, whom I had contacted weeks earlier, sent me a text. She's expanding her business. Recruiting younger girls. Same methods. Same lies. I felt a chill run through me. This was bigger than personal revenge. She was still hurting others. I couldn't wait any longer. I began drafting the first formal report. Detailed. Documented. Ironclad. I submitted copies to local authorities, labor oversight agencies, and advocacy organizations for exploited workers. Each page was a statement, the truth would not be hidden. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear, knowing that my escape had turned into power. I was no longer running from her. I was preparing to confront her. I had been careful. Methodical. Every contact, every step documented, every move calculated. Yet, the moment arrived faster than I expected. It was a Thursday. A gray, drizzling morning. I had just finished a report I'd spent weeks compiling, a meticulous chronicle of Marta Korolenko's operations, the unpaid labor, the manipulations, the patterns of abuse that spanned more than a decade. I sat at my desk in my Cleveland apartment, sipping black coffee, staring at the screen, making sure the files were complete. Every photograph of worn hands, every payroll ledger, every message from former employees neatly catalogued. Then the knock came. Soft. Tentative. Hesitant. My stomach clenched. I froze. My hand hovered over the door handle, every instinct screaming to check before opening. But something in me, something that had grown over 10 years of survival and planning, held me steady. I didn't panic. Not anymore. I didn't flinch. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her. Marta. Older, thinner, trembling slightly, her eyes darting, not meeting mine. The confident, unyielding authority I remembered from my teenage years was gone. Replaced by fear. Confusion. Something raw and fragile. She was holding a small tote bag, clutched to her chest, her knuckles white. "Elena," she whispered, voice unsteady. I need to talk." I didn't move. Didn't invite her in. I just studied her. Every detail, the way her posture sagged, the way her shoes scuffed nervously against the tile, the hesitation in her hands. The quiet terror. The vulnerability. The realization that she had underestimated me for a decade. "You've changed," she said, almost pleading. "Yes," I replied simply. "I have." I closed the door gently, letting her stand there, outside, in the drizzle. I didn't invite her in. I didn't speak further. Silence carried more weight than words ever could. Over the next few days, I began orchestrating controlled contact. I sent subtle messages through former employees, asking about her operations. I watched from a distance. I observed her patterns, her schedule, her routines. And I realized she had started to unravel. Employees were whispering about the new strictures, about how she yelled, how she was losing control, how the illusion of power she had wielded for years was slipping. I met with former victims quietly. 7 women in total, each with their own stories, but all with the same thread: exploitation, fear, and silence. They were hesitant at first, unsure if I could be trusted. But when I showed them the evidence, the ledgers, the emails, the photographs, they finally saw a path forward. A chance to reclaim their voices. I didn't approach Marta directly. Not yet. Instead, I gathered information. Dates. Times. Names. Every transaction she had touched. Every promise she had broken. Every lie she had spun. I built a web of facts, a network of truth. Then came the first confrontation. Not face to face. A phone call. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice cracked over the line. I'm doing what you never did, I said. I'm holding you accountable. The line went silent. A long pause. Then, I thought you would forgive me. I laughed softly, bitterly. Forgive you? You never gave me a choice to begin with. Every word I had spoken was deliberate. Every emotion controlled. I wasn't the terrified girl she had manipulated. I was someone she had created, trained, and tried to break, but failed. I had learned patience. Observation. Precision. Strategy. A few days later, I arranged a small meeting in a neutral space. A rented conference room downtown. Neutral. Public enough to prevent her from lashing out violently, private enough to avoid prying eyes. She arrived early, jittery, looking around, scanning the room as if expecting an ambush. I stayed seated, calm, reviewing notes, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I could see the calculations behind her gaze, the realization that I had learned everything she had tried to hide. That I had anticipated every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to control. You think you're clever, she said, voice trembling. I know I am, I replied. I survived. You didn't account for that. For the first time, she faltered. Her eyes darted to the table, to the folders I had meticulously prepared, payroll records, emails, messages, photographs, testimonies. Every piece of evidence of her decades of control laid bare. She realized that the power she had wielded so effortlessly had crumbled. The tension in the room was electric. I felt my pulse steady, my breathing slow. This was not fear. Not retaliation. It was justice. Finally. You've been watching me, she whispered, almost a confession. I've been learning, I said. I've been planning. And now, it's your turn to understand what it's like to be powerless. I watched her stumble over words, her control slipping. I realized then that fear was no longer mine to carry. The years of manipulation, the silent labor, the invisible chains, they were hers now. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I let the evidence speak. The stories of other victims, carefully compiled, all laid bare. Every detail confirmed, every lie exposed. For hours, I guided her through the facts. She tried to interrupt, to explain, to justify, but every word was countered by proof, by testimony, by records. Slowly, systematically, she began to understand the gravity of her actions. That she had created a life of fear, that she had stolen years, that the quiet strength she had dismissed had grown into something unstoppable. By the time the meeting ended, she was pale, exhausted, broken. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. She had looked at me expecting the scared girl she once knew. Instead, she faced a woman who had survived, thrived, and reclaimed her power. As she walked away, silent and trembling, I realized I had crossed a threshold. Not just revenge, not just justice, but transformation. I had become the strategist, the architect of accountability. And for the first time, I felt the weight of her fear, mirrored against the years of my own. I stepped out of the room and into the bustling streets of Cleveland. The drizzle had stopped. The city moved around me, oblivious. I was invisible and visible at once. A survivor. A witness. An agent of reckoning. I had waited, I had planned, I had observed. And now, the moment of confrontation had passed, leaving only clarity, power, and the beginning of the next stage. If this story shocked you, hit like and subscribe. Some stories are not meant to be ignored. The day she arrived at my apartment, I knew instinctively that everything had shifted. It wasn't a knock. It was hesitation, deliberate and measured, the kind only someone inured to fear makes. I stood near the door, calm, collected. My hands rested lightly on the frame. I didn't rush. I didn't invite her in. Marta was there, the woman who had once ruled my life with invisible chains. Now, she was hesitant, tentative, a shadow of her former authority. Her tote bag clutched so tightly it strained her knuckles. Eyes wide, darting. Confusion and fear painted across her face like a mask she hadn't yet learned to remove. Elena, she stammered. I need. You don't need anything, I interrupted softly, firmly. Not anymore. I stepped aside, letting her peer inside, scanning the apartment that smelled of my life, my choices. Everything clean, organized, deliberate. Every shelf, every framed photograph, every object a subtle statement, I own this. I belong here. Her gaze flickered to a folder on my coffee table, thick and bound with precision. She recognized it instantly, the meticulous documentation of years of her exploitation, of every person she'd manipulated, every transaction she'd controlled. I didn't know, she whispered, almost a plea. I saw everything, I said. I recorded everything. And now, I've prepared. I opened the folder slowly. Hand-picked evidence. Employee testimonies. Photographs of her offices. Receipts, payroll records, messages, every detail of the unpaid labor and silent coercion she had imposed. The weight of it made her step back, unsure where to place her feet. Her perfect posture faltered. She had always counted on fear to maintain her authority, and for the first time, fear was hers. You've changed, she murmured. Not a question. A statement trembling on the edge of disbelief. Yes, I said. I survived. I adapted. I learned. And you? I paused, letting the words settle between us like dust in sunlight. You underestimated me. Her eyes flickered with calculation. Maybe she thought she could regain control, but the years of planning, the meticulous collection of facts, the network of allies I had built, had made her powerless. Every threat, every note she had sent over the years, every whisper of fear she tried to invoke, had only hardened me. I could see her mind racing. Every step I had taken, every precaution, every move had been calculated. And now, she was trapped in a room where her past deeds were laid bare, where her authority evaporated with each page I turned. You're organized, she admitted, voice shaking. You. Yes, I said, cutting her off. I am organized. I am prepared. And I won't allow you to hurt anyone else. Not now. Not ever again. She faltered. She looked around, suddenly small in the space she once dominated. I realized then the full power of what I had created, silence, strategy, and evidence. The balance had shifted entirely. For hours, we spoke in hushed tones. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I presented the facts. Each piece of documentation a silent hammer, each photograph a mirror reflecting the truth she had hidden. She tried to interject, to defend herself, to rationalize her control over years of lives. But the weight of evidence, the clarity of truth, left her no room for lies. I could see it in her eyes, confusion, shame, terror. She had always believed that fear would bind me forever. She had counted on compliance. But now, 10 years later, that compliance had transformed into a force she could not contain. You underestimated me, I said again, softly. You assumed I was still the frightened girl. You assumed obedience would last forever. You assumed I would remain invisible. But I am not her. I am me. Her breathing quickened. She fumbled with the tote bag. Papers spilled onto the floor. She reached to collect them, but her hands shook uncontrollably. I didn't move. I didn't assist. I let her witness the consequences of underestimating someone who had learned patience, observation, and resilience. I could have called the authorities right then. Could have had her arrested immediately for labor violations, coercion, fraud. But I waited. I let her realize, fully, what she had lost. The control she had wielded like a blade had been stripped away without a word, without a fight. I guided her through the evidence, carefully, methodically, allowing her to see her own actions reflected back at her. Her shoulders slumped. Her confident gaze fractured. She began to understand the reach of her misdeeds. She realized she had created a trail, and I had followed it meticulously, carefully, like a spider tracing the silk of a web she herself had spun. The silence was heavy. The tension, palpable. Not a single word could erase what she had done, nor the years she had taken from me. And then, finally, I spoke. This isn't vengeance. It's accountability. It's the cost of the life you tried to control. And now, you see it clearly. Her hands dropped. The trembling became a shiver of helplessness. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as her niece, but as a force she had failed to reckon with. The confrontation ended not with violence, not with threats, but with a quiet understanding. She left my apartment that day shaken, aware that her power had evaporated, aware that the girl she once controlled was gone, replaced by a woman who had mastered patience, strategy, and control. I stood by the window, watching her retreating figure, feeling a strange serenity. This was not a moment of triumph or victory in the traditional sense. It was a quiet justice, earned over years of suffering, observation, and calculated action. And as the city moved around me, oblivious to the quiet reckoning that had just taken place in a small apartment on Maplewood Avenue, I felt the first true sense of freedom in a decade. Freedom from fear. Freedom from the past. Freedom from the shadow of someone who had once held me captive. I had waited. I had planned. I had observed. And finally, the balance had shifted entirely. That it started with a single call. A tip I had carefully prepared for months. An anonymous email to the Cleveland Labor Board, detailing Marta Korolenko's years of exploitation, the unpaid labor, the manipulation. Screenshots, photographs, testimony. Everything. I sent copies to the city attorney, a respected law firm, and even local news outlets that specialized in uncovering corruption. Every detail verified, every fact indisputable. The day the investigators arrived at her business, I didn't watch. I didn't wait outside. I stayed in my apartment, making tea, listening to the soft hum of the city. And yet, I felt the thrill of inevitability. I had planted every seed, now, the storm would arrive on its own. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Detective Harris, a steady voice on the other end. Ms. Morrows, we've reviewed your files. The evidence is solid. We have witnesses, financial records, and testimonies. We're moving forward with arrests and charges. A smile touched my lips. Years of fear, exploitation, and silence, finally giving way to accountability. Justice wasn't immediate, but it was coming. I arranged to meet some of the former employees in a small community center downtown. 7 women, each with their own story of silence and suffering, gathered hesitantly. I handed them copies of the documentation. This is your truth, I told them. We will make sure it's heard. You are not invisible anymore. Tears glistened in their eyes. Some laughed softly, some whispered prayers. One woman, Nadia, who had cleaned Marta's offices for 5 years without pay, hugged me. I never thought anyone would believe me, she said. Thank you, Elena. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It's not just me. It's all of us. Meanwhile, Marta tried to regain control. She called, texted, begged. Elena, please, I can explain. I didn't know what I was doing. I ignored her. The day she was served with official documents, the first time law enforcement confronted her directly, I stayed home. I didn't watch. I didn't need to. I had seen her at the apartment, trembling, broken, powerless. That image would carry her through the coming weeks in court. Court sessions were tense. Marta arrived with a lawyer, confident at first. But as witnesses spoke, documents were presented, and photographs were examined, her composure cracked. The courtroom, once a place of her imagined authority, became a stage for her reckoning. I sat quietly in the back, listening. Every victim spoke. Every detail verified. Every lie she had spun exposed. Her network of control, the subtle manipulations, the unpaid labor, the intimidation, it all came into the light. And then came my moment. I stood, presenting my own account calmly, meticulously, without emotion but with undeniable clarity. I spoke of fear, of submission, of years spent invisible, of endurance. I spoke of resilience, observation, and strategy. I spoke of the meticulous planning that had ensured her downfall. The room was silent. Her eyes met mine, wide with disbelief, shame, and finally, understanding. I was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived on her doorstep 10 years ago. I was a woman with a voice, a presence, and a force she could no longer suppress. The verdict was decisive. Marta Korolenko was found guilty on multiple counts of labor violations, coercion, and abuse. She was fined, ordered to pay restitution, and prohibited from managing any business involving employees for the next decade. Her empire of control crumbled. Former employees received compensation, their voices finally validated. I walked out of the courtroom into the sunlight, a strange serenity settling over me. The city moved around me, indifferent, but for me, everything had changed. I returned to my apartment, breathing in the calm, feeling the weight of years lift. For the first time, I felt fully free. The fear that had haunted me, the chains that had bound me, the silent labor, the manipulation, it was all gone. Replaced by clarity, strength, and the knowledge that justice, patient and deliberate, had been served. I thought about Marta, about the terror she had instilled, about the lessons she had unwittingly taught me. Survival, patience, observation, strategy, skills I had honed under duress, now my own. And I realized something fundamental: family isn't blood. It's who chooses you. Those who protect, nurture, and empower you are the family you deserve. Those who exploit and diminish you are not. I sat by my window, watching the sun set over Cleveland, painting the streets gold and soft gray. I thought of the women who had joined me in reclaiming their voices. I thought of my own journey, the decade of fear, labor, and quiet observation. And I smiled softly. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer a victim. I had endured, survived, and now, I thrived. The past could not touch me. Marta's shadow could not reach me. Justice had been served, and the balance restored. If this story shocked you, hit like and subscribe. Some truths are worth hearing. Some voices are worth listening to. And some battles, fought quietly over years, finally bring justice not just for oneself, but for everyone who has been silenced.